that if any persons to the number of 12 or more, being unlawfully, riotously, and tumultuously assembled together, to the disturbance of the public peace, and being required or commanded by any one or more justice or justices of the peace, or by the sheriff of the county, where such assembly shall be, by proclamation to be made in the king's name, in the form herein after directed, to disperse themselves and peaceably to depart to their habitations, or to their lawful business, shall to the number of 12 or more unlawfully, riotously, and tumultuously remain, or continue together by the space of 1 hour after such command or request made by proclamation, that then such continuing together to the number of 12 or more shall be adjudged felons, and shall suffer death as in a case of felony. That's reading someone the Riot Act. In 1714, the British Parliament passed a law that has literally come down to history as the Riot Act. It was read aloud to supposedly unruly or riotous crowds, and if you failed to disperse in 1 hour, you could be arrested, detained, and executed based on the provisions in this law. Yep, that's right. Rioting, as defined by English authorities at any time, was a capital offense. Let me set the background for this law. In 1714, the Queen of England, Anne, died. Anne was childless. She was also Protestant, and her nearest relative was her brother, who was Catholic. There are those in English elites who did not want a Catholic monarch. So power went to a distant cousin, George. He was German, not English. He didn't speak English and never learned. This family, the House of Hanover, is actually still the one that's in power now through a lot of twists and turns. Well, when George came to England and was crowned, the expectation was that people would be happy to get their Protestant king. But a lot of people weren't so happy. And instead of reveling in the new king's coronation, they rioted and protested and made demonstrations in public. And this scared a lot of land-owning and powerful English, the same group that controlled Parliament. And they passed this law, the Riot Act. It's not actually called the Riot Act. It's called, I want to get this right here. An act for preventing tumults and riotous assemblies and for the more speedy and effectual punishing of the rioters. Admittedly, it's a little bit of a mouthful. Now, the Riot Act was in effect until 1967, when England did a bunch of criminal reforms. It was repealed. But the last time it was publicly used was in 1919 to break a strike of striking workers in Glasgow, Scotland. But the law has been famously used a bunch of other times. And reading someone the Riot Act is actually part of just cliche colloquial English. So let's talk about a few times the Riot Act was used. 1768, St. George's Field, London. Radical politician John Wilkes locked up for complaining about the English government. A crowd of, some say 10,000, some say 20,000, it's hard to get a gauge, shows up to demand his release. They're peaceably protesting, but it's getting ugly. The cops decide to escalate. I say cops, even though England had no official police force at the time. Really, we're talking about kind of like local constables or the militia or military in this case. They decide to escalate and read the Riot Act. This inflames the crowd. It starts getting a little nasty. The militia shoots into the crowd and kills about a dozen people. This comes to be known as the St. George's Massacre. There's an even more famous use of the Riot Act, and that famous use happened in 1819. 1819 was a tough year in England. Economic troubles. They had just completed a long war against France that was extremely costly, both in terms of money and men, and went on for 25 years.
I don't think it's going to work. No?
And there was a real clamoring among a lot of people in the English public for better conditions and electoral reform. And they decided to demonstrate their peaceful intentions and have a peaceful meeting one day on St. Peter's Field in Manchester. The day for their meeting came, and anywhere between 30 and 100,000 people showed up. There's a lot of disputing over the numbers on this one. Most common number I've seen is actually 60,000. They were supposed to listen to speeches, and many people brought their families. But it didn't go that great. And the local authorities, the landowning elite, the same kind of guys who passed the Riot Act were afraid.
We are in charge, gentlemen, and we must be seen to be in charge.
They were afraid that this demonstration was a riot and an effort to overthrow the English government, make a revolution like it happened in France in 1789. So they called out the local militia. Remember, there's no national police force yet. And they read the Riot Act to the crowd.
I have the Riot Act here, and they shall hear my voice.
And then used the crowd's failure to disperse as a pretext for mounting up their horses, drawing their sabers, and riding into that crowd, slashing about at people as they went. The official death toll is about 15. A lot of people who were there tell you a lot more people died. This is called the Peterloo Massacre. It's kind of a parody of the word Waterloo, Britain's great victory against Napoleon, but now the British Army turned against its own people. Well, the British government whitewashed the investigation of the massacre and didn't really do much about it, except pass 6 more laws that repressed dissent, called the Six Acts. After hearing about the Peterloo Massacre, Percy Shelley, the famous British poet and husband of Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, wrote a poem about it. The poem is entitled The Mask of Anarchy, and if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read you a short part of it right now. And if the tyrants dare, let them ride among you there, slash and stab and maim and hew. What they like, that let them do. Folded arms and steady eyes, and little fear and less surprise. Look upon them as they slay, till their rage has died away. Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. Laws like the Riot Act definitely do often chill dissent. That's their function. The goal is to kind of shut everybody up and keep them in their place. And that law had that effect in England. However, these laws reveal something else. They often reveal a government that's quite insecure. A government that's not so concerned with law and order, but with preserving its own particular political position or preserving a social and economic hierarchy. So we need to make sure that any measures we take against so-called rioters are motivated by a sincere desire to maintain public order, not by a desire to keep people in an oppressive position in society or to silence people from telling the truth that those in power may find inconvenient.